It is my pleasure to introduce Steve Treseler to present today. Pull up his bio here. Steve Treseler is a Seattle-based saxophonist, teaching artist and composer. Downbeat Magazine calls his music beautifully crafted ensemble pieces, whether free, through composed, or somewhere in between. His collaborations with renowned trumpeter Ingrid Jensen have been featured in the New York Times, Downbeat, and on NPR's Jazz Night in America. Steve is the founder of Infinite Improvisation, offering creative music experiences in a variety of mediums, in person and virtual workshops, instructional books, and digital courses. And on a personal note, I'll say that I've been using Steve's Infinite Improvisation blues improv course for the last semester, and it's been a game changer for myself and for my students. So I really appreciate that. So please join me in welcoming Steve to this morning's presentation.
All right, good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. Thanks to Jeremy and to Dan Davey for inviting me to present, and Sarah Owen for plugging the session for a lot of you that were at the last one, which was awesome. And yeah, I appreciate the commute to Oregon. I'm reporting from Seattle here, so I said to walk downstairs and be in Oregon, but definitely love coming down. I think one of my first trips, once it's safe to breathe around other people, come down and hopefully connect with a bunch of you in real life. So I'm not a band teacher, but I work with a whole host of music programs throughout the Northwest, designing some improvisation programs for middle school, high school, and university jazz programs. So during this pandemic, something we've all been trying to solve as musicians and as educators is how can we have meaningful musical experiences with other people when we're physically isolated. And one pathway through this I found is through some of these improvisation games and activities that I've led in person. And this may be a new concept for lots of you. So I'd like to go over what these are, what the benefits are for your students, and what can transfer to remote learning. I'm going to suggest doing the unthinkable, which is to have your students play together at the same time over Zoom unmuted and have some awesome things happen, and some creative messes, and that's all. That's all part of this. So in these community-based workshops that I lead, it started with jazz programs saying, "Hey, Steve, can you come in and teach our kids how to solo?" And over time, I made these community-building games and activities a really important part of these programs. So part of what I do is training jazz soloists to, play tunes and play over changes and all of that. But one of the most effective things, some of these games and activities, and a lot of them are drawn from more experimental or, quote, free jazz traditions, which has kind of the sort of a stigma in the jazz education world. It is too out there and too weird, but I found that it can be a really, really strong entry point and even accessible for students. Parents even love it. And some of the benefits are having your students just right off the bat being creative and expressive with their instruments, being spontaneous, listening, and being interactive. So often we're giving students specific instructions. You're going to sit in this chair and you're going to play these notes in this way, in this time, which there's value to that for building skills, but there's so much more we can offer for having students have more ownership over the music and being more fully self-expressed and be ready for various musical situations. So some of these can be a final product for performance. I've performed some of these games and activities, in concert halls for parents, and which was pretty well received. But as a process, it can be a gateway to having students have more confidence in being improvisers, possibly planting the seeds for composition, and collaborating in situations where there's no sheet music. Someone's friend may have a band. I'm like, hey, come play trombone with us, and there might not be a chart, and you have to find your way through listening and fitting into that. So this is a much broader concept than just training jazz soloists. And here's a quote from one of my mentors, William Aludine Matthew, wrote a book called Harmonic Experience. He's been one of my mentors through his writing, and I've had some lessons with him in person. But he says the purpose of musical games is not to generate a polished product, but to make musicians feel safe, adventuresome, and confident in the creative process. So there's some barriers for doing this remotely. Sound quality, some things we've all been dealing with. It's important for all students to have headphones on, if possible, so we can all hear and minimize feedback. Once everyone's unmuted, it can be pretty wild. So having headphones, dealing with audio quality, external microphones when people can have them. I know you've talked about that in some other sessions. But the elephant in the room is latency. right? No surprise to any of you. There's a delay. When I speak, there's a delay between me speaking and you hearing it, which isn't a big problem when we're having a conference, but it's a deal breaker for rehearsing music. So, and it's the case for any of these conferencing platforms. As a side note, there are low latency platforms that I've used for playing with other professional musicians. Jam Kazam, Jamulus, there's a new one called Sonobus that I want to try, where we can get the latency down to under 10 milliseconds, meaning it's the time it takes the sound to travel just across the stage. So I can have in-sync jazz rehearsals and sessions, and it's super cool. It is not practical for most teaching situations because it requires everyone to have high-speed hardwired Ethernet and an audio interface. It can be hard enough to get some of our students to connect on their phone with sketchy internet connections. So, a little side note on the platforms. So, improvisation requires us to work within musical limitations, whether it's a specific tempo or a key. Like if we're going to jam, hey, let's jam in A minor. 1, 2, 3, 4. We've got musical limitations. I set a pulse. Here's a framework of a key that we're going to play in, and we're used to those limitations. But now we're going to pivot to some that are more abstract, that might be more about dynamics or density or texture. But another element we have here is latency. This is a creative limitation. So we need to understand a delay is going to happen. So we have to play and sing in a way that will make sense, even if it's slightly out of phase. So, if you're used to locking into a groove all the time, these frameworks may push you into some new territories. So I've got a bunch of video clips so you can see some of these in action. So I'd like to start something that I developed, probably started like 15 years ago, which I've been calling sound worlds, which are some soundscapes and textures. And there's some novelty built into these as well. So these aren't like a traditional melody, harmony, rhythm framework that you're used to, but rather things that are more evocative of the natural world or a machine or something like that. And it really helps us build experiences that work for students with mixed levels. So when I'm doing workshops, there's people with all different technical levels. I mean, I first developed these. I was teaching a beginning jazz class at a summer workshop for it was middle school and high school, and the range of students went from a couple kids that could really play and play tunes down to this one kid. I asked him what instrument he played, and he said, I don't play an instrument, and my parents just rented me this trumpet last week. So I had these kids for 3 weeks, and this is where I started piecing these together so we could all participate at the same time. So I have a few clips here. This is from an in-person workshop I ran through Seattle Jazz Ed, an awesome nonprofit in Seattle. So this is an elementary school jazz workshop. So this is 4th through 6th graders. And the first one here is this also comes from William Matthew, a ribbon game, where essentially we're just alternating. One person makes a sound and it passes around. So this one I divided into a small group. So this is 3 bass players and 2 piano players playing a ribbon game. So you can see we've came up with a whole bunch of these, and kids are suggesting their own. And I have some of these on the website outlined what some of these prompts are. All right, so here's a few of these. Factory. Traffic. THX. But look how much fun they were having. Yeah, and that kid was always slouching. When later on I made him, I had to make him stand up actually. But for these games, I was letting them, playing every which way they like. So they're having a good time. They're all smiling. I don't say, now we're going to improvise. I'm like, no, we're going to play Traffic. And like, yeah. And I mean, they just loved doing these. And, it helps them build some confidence and camaraderie. Again, once they've made some kind of goofy chicken sounds in front of their friends, they're much more likely to volunteer to play a solo. And the same group of kids were learning jazz tunes and even playing at a jam session at the Royal Room, this club in Seattle. Oh, there's one more video with the elementary school thing. This is some free conducting. So they have fun doing that. And, a lot of the time when we're teaching improvisation, we make this sort of this assumption that improvisation is soloing. All we're going to do is take turns playing solos. We're going to pass the microphone around, which can be fine in a combo. But if you've got 20, 30, or even more students in a room, if we're just taking turns playing solos, most of the time, a lot of people are sitting around not doing anything. And being put on the spot really is what can activate the fight, flight, freeze response. When you're doing it as a group, it's not scary. Just like for some, public speaking can be scary. When you're on the spot and everyone's looking at you, that can activate that fear response. But talking isn't scary. Having a conversation with your friends isn't scary. So we can do the same thing musically to sidestep fight, flight, freeze by making it a fun thing you're doing with your friends rather than being put on the spot. These Sound Worlds activities were inspired by my time at New England Conservatory, working with Alan Chase, a fabulous saxophonist and educator. And he led our combo through some structured improvisations that had titles like Forest, Clouds, and things like that. And I've found that these textures work really well over Zoom, and so I have clips of a few of these. So here's an example of his texture. This one is called Stars. So pointillistic textures with substantial silence around them. Short isolated sounds or small groups of sounds with long silences before and after them. A high ratio of silence to sound. So this is with, I believe this is my saxophone studio. I do virtual master classes. So here's Stars with a bunch of saxophones. I just noticed a kid stuck a little Maceo Parker lick in there he had transcribed earlier. He was sneaky. Okay, so, and again, in Sarah's session, last year was talking about putting some different layers into a digital audio workstation. Some of these things, these can be really cool for making a sound texture like this, and you can put that in the Soundtrap or whatever your DAW is and add more layers, or people can improvise on top of these, which is what I do in person. We might have a texture and someone who's more experienced playing some kind of improvisation on top of it. Okay, here's Clouds. This is relatively sustained, overlapping sounds, floating clouds or colors or washes of sound with the option of silences before and after them. So this is an improvisation class I teach at Seattle Pacific University. So a wide range of musicians from different backgrounds. So here's an example of Clouds. So in this group, there's about 12 people in the room. Unfortunately, I didn't record in gallery view for these. And some of these you can start doing with more and more people if you've got giant ensembles. There's some of these, the more people you get, the more limitations you need. And it gets challenging. So breaking people up into small groups, a lot of these work really well, even in groups from 3 to 8 musicians. But some of these work, Stars and Clouds you can do with louder groups, but it just takes a lot of, or with larger groups. Take some experimentation. All right, one more of Alan's. This is Forest. This is one of my favorites, like doing in person. So everyone begins on a downbeat, playing a short, repeatable phrase. So you play an ostinato or just a short phrase or fragment, and you leave lots of space, and then play the exact same fragment again. So you need to play something that you can remember and play over and over again without getting tired. And people are playing at their own tempo. You can't do this with a pulse, not over Zoom. And as students are playing, sometimes they're overlapping with different musicians each time they play the phrase. So it's about playing something concise and repeatable, but it's also a listening exercise that you're rotating your attention. You're listening to the overall sound of this forest texture. I mean, it's called forest, I imagine, because you've got the bird sounds, you've got the river rushing, you've got the leaf blower because you're not that far in the forest. And all these sounds, they fit together into this world of sounds, but they're not directly interacting with each other. So you rotate your attention, listening to the whole group, but then also trying to listen individually to each individual musician. So you hear what this person is playing for their phrase. You hear what this person is phrase. So it's a listening exercise, which you need to do when you're in a section. You need to listen to the person next to you. You need to listen to yourself. You need to listen to the whole group. So this one turned out kind of cool. This is actually, I was doing very small groups for my SPU class. So this is an oboe, a guitar, and a piano player doing Forest. Oh, and for all these sessions that I'm showing you, this was the first time I introduced these to any of these students. None of them had done this before, and they were gracious enough to let me record a couple clips. So here's a quick Forest. Okay, here's a fun one I did with my saxophone studio. This one's Casino. If you've been on the casino floor, all the slot machines are tuned to the key of C. So I'm not promoting gambling or anything for my kids, but so I just have them play a concert C major triad, just playing it rapidly, and it's supposed to have a little bit of the chaos of the casino floor, but we've got a pitch limitation. So here we go. Casino. So it's an introduction to some of those sound textures. And another area I draw from for these workshops is from the world of improv theater, taking some of these improv theater games and adapting them to music. So these can be very theatrical, but the kids really like them. And again, it's this gateway to being spontaneous, being expressive, being collaborative, and trying some things. Here's Guess the Animal. This is a fun one, where you divide people into small groups, and then they have a little group in a meeting about what animal they're going to try and express musically, and then they come back to the large group and play it for everyone. So you can do this with breakout rooms. It works pretty well. So this is a clip from the Lionel Hampton Jazz Festival. So this is a bunch of kids from all different schools who showed up to the workshop, and this is sort of what Guess the Animal sounds like. And again, it's heartwarming to see people like volunteering to go next, which doesn't always happen. You have a guess for what it is. On your marks, get set, go. I thought you were going to go first. Is it a horse? Yeah. Is it a horse? It is a horse. All right. Awesome, nailed it. First time. Okay, let's do one of the vocal groups. We'll go with this group. Okay, guess the animal. I guess. Okay, you get the idea. And then there's some variations on that I do. Guess the emotion, guess the machine. It's like doing impressions of race cars and dryers, which can be super fun. All right, now we're going to get into a couple areas that blur this line between improvisation and composition. Talk about sound painting, talk on graphic scores. These are areas where some people are insistent that this is a composition, that this is an improvisation. I don't see a huge distinction once we get into this territory, but I might get in trouble for calling sound painting improvisation. Sound painting is a sign language for live composition, meaning there's someone in front, a conductor, who's the sound painter, who's giving a series of signs and gestures that give directions about what people are going to play. There's some who gestures, who plays, what you play, but with each of these signs, there's some freedom about what musical decisions you get to make. So it's a great way to organize group improvisation that doesn't turn into total chaos right away if you don't want it to. And it's multidisciplinary, so each of these signs means something specific for actors and dancers and visual artists, and I'm a part of the Sound Painting Lab ensemble. We're doing live sound painting over Zoom and recording it. I'm working with an actor and a visual artist from Argentina. We've got a violin player in Belgium, a percussionist and dancer in New York City. We've got this group, and we've been working on doing live stream concerts, and pretty awesome. But here's a little bit of what it looks like in person. Here's Walter Thompson, who created sound painting. This is a great way to work with. If I come and do a workshop, maybe with an orchestra who's never done any improvising, sound painting is a really, really great introductory activity. So here we go. Some of that can be quite dissonant too. So if the dissonance bugs you, you can put in a pitch limitation. Be like, okay, we're going to do some of these, within a pentatonic scale. Then suddenly it can become a whole lot more consonant. And I'm going to in the website include a link to some sound painting resources. But it is a huge. I mean, there's over 1,500 signs. So it gets pretty deep, but it can also be a great intro activity as well. So this group that I play in, here's us playing. This was back in April when everything shut down. This was before Zoom even had professional music mode, and we live streamed a concert doing sound painting. Here's Scrambler. So what he was doing there was we were playing something and he gave a sign called a sound memory. This is sound memory 1, meaning remember this because we're going to bring it back later. So you can bring different themes back and forth. This needs its own session, but just kind of an introduction that sound painting exists. It's something that works really well. And I know for some of you hearing this, it's maybe a little bit too out there. But again, I've used this the workshop I was doing in Honolulu, we were doing a Mingus tune, and I was using sound painting for improvised background. So they're playing a tune, bop, bop, bop. So aesthetically, you can shape some of these in any different direction. If you want it to be more consonant, or you want it to be more rhythmic or more jazz-like, I don't make this huge distinction in the process. I mean, in a lot of my workshops, we'll be doing some of these games that are a little more abstract, then go straight into we're going to play Bag's Groove by ear and kind of mix things up. Again, depends on what I'm working with. Probably not going to have a lot of time to get into graphic scores, but this has been pretty awesome. On the website, I have like a video that's an introduction to graphic scores. This is a student score that we interpreted. So looking at a score, but not with traditional notation, with shapes and symbols or images, and figuring out how to interpret them musically. Here's one of my favorite ones to do. This is by Martin Back. It's called Cricket Traffic Sonic Map, if I got the words right in that order. So I've done this with all different levels, university, middle school. We're looking at this, and there's no other instructions. This is your score. And we just play it and try to figure out, what do we do with this? And then we have a discussion about it. Are different people going to be different things? This person's going to be the wind chimes. This other person's going to be the crickets. Or are we going to find some other way to interpret it? So looking at something ambiguous, it really gives us something to focus on, and works pretty well remotely as well. I've linked this on the site. Here's one I made with my daughter. I was presenting on graphic scores, and I messed up. I didn't realize her school was canceled. She was home with me, so we made a little graphic score based on the Seattle train map. So there's some directions on here. So some are more abstract. This one sounds pretty chaotic, but it's really fun. People like playing it, and it gives a little bit of the anxiety of public transit. So here's one again. This is right when stuff shut down. I was teaching this class at SPU. We were meeting in person, and then it went online. So 2 weeks later, a student made a graphic score and played it, made a little video of his graphic score, and we tried this as a group, playing a graphic score. Again, this is like maybe week 1 or 2 when we were online. So here's a student graphic score with people over Zoom interpreting it. Okay, that is a whole lot of things to throw at you that I've been working on over the years. But a couple of these, maybe there's 1 or 2 nuggets here that you could use that you think would be a really good fit for your group. I mean, one thing one of my teachers, Aludine Matthew, who I mentioned earlier, said, finding the right game for the people that are in the room with you at this moment. So you can take what I've offered, or maybe you shape it into something else. I think I want to touch on switching gears. Jeremy and Sarah had mentioned this. Switching gears to something a whole lot more straight ahead is this blues course I put together for teaching beginning jazz improvisation. Another entry point, besides all the sound worlds, all this more textural stuff we were doing, is leading through call and response, teaching simple tunes by ear and having students do their own variations and question answer phrases and things like that. And once everything shut down and we're on Zoom, I was leading some workshops where I was muting all the students and doing that, or sending students practice tracks where I would play 4 bars and leave it empty for my student to respond. And then I had a little light bulb, ding, ding, ding. Well, if everything's muted, this doesn't have to be in person. I can pre-record all this stuff. There's a free version of the course that has a whole lot of the basic stuff that you're welcome to check out. Okay, I have more to upload here, but here's some of the free resources. The course I'm talking about, improvisation games for ensembles. There's some creative limitation menus in here that you might find useful. So I can email that out to you. Here's some of the sound worlds, Alan Chase's games, links to those graphic scores that you can use. So here is this course, switching gears to more straight ahead jazz, building a rhythmic and a melodic foundation, and that vocabulary that needs to come before getting into the weeds of the theory and the harmony. So getting students to be able to play rhythmically and groove, play some variations, get call and response phrases going. This is all front loaded with that. So call and response on one note. There's a lot of interactive things where I'll play a phrase, have students play it back. These are things that you can all model on your own, but some of you that maybe aren't have lots of jazz experience yourself, you can kind of outsource that to me to do a lot of the call and response. I'm going to start with the intro demonstration. Now I'll play one of my favorite demonstrations, illustrating the point that rhythm and tone are more important than playing right notes. I'll play a couple choruses of blues. The first, I will play all right notes. I'll hit the chord tones, and I'll paste in some jazz vocabulary, but I'll play with crappy rhythm and with a crappy sound. And in the next chorus, I'm going to be playing all kinds of wrong notes. I'll be playing in the wrong key, clunkers everywhere, but I'll play with a full sound and play with a stronger rhythmic feel. And you tell me which sounds better. And spoiler alert, the second one sounds better. I played all kinds of sharp ones and major sevenths on dominant chords, and with the phrasing, it can work. But what the course gets into is a lot of call and response. I'll have a very narrow pitch limitation, just like scale degrees, 1, 2, and flat 3 as an example. And it's okay if you don't get it the first time. I mean, this is a process of trial and error, and that's how we really develop the skill of being able to hear something and figuring it out on our instrument without having to read it off the page. And so forth. And that walks you through a whole bunch of riff tunes, teaches a bunch of tunes, like 6 or 7 riff tunes by ear, call and response, some different pitch limitations before getting into the theory. And then later on, it does a walkthrough of here's the basic chords, here's some voice leading, chord progressions, but really front loaded with the rhythmic and melodic stuff. So you can find that on my course again, on the site that I linked to, the free version of that, so you can check out a lot of the intro material. Yeah, it's a wild adventure. Trying the stuff where you're going to unmute everybody, and sometimes it can turn into a big mess pretty quickly, but other times you have some really interactive musical experience. I'm doing with some groups and some kids who've said they hadn't played music at the same time with another human for over 6 months, until we did like the Clouds game or something. It's like, and you can get some moments. Dan, I wish we'd recorded that session that we did at Mount Hood. We had a really good Clouds in that one, but that wasn't recorded. But
yeah, I know. And one of the things I wanted to say, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
When you did the session with us, I had one student in particular who didn't have much experience with improvising, and one of his comments was that your games and activities made it really accessible for him and really inviting for him to try. He had kind of some fears around improv prior to that. So that was an awesome session. And I put a thing in the chat there that everybody should have you come work with their students, because it's a game changer for them.
Awesome, thanks.
I can see that being a
And
real.
Jeremy for doing my. I don't have to sell from the stage. You guys are pitching for me. I really appreciate it. Checks in the mail, Dan. No, I really appreciate that.
All right. Well, on behalf of OMEA, please join me in thanking Steve for his presentation today. Yeah, it's good stuff. And again, I can't recommend the blues improv course enough for anybody looking to go that specific route too. With that, I'm going to go ahead and leave this open for a couple minutes in case you guys want to have a conversation and dialogue with Steve for as long as he's got available. I have to jet so I can go host another session. Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, thanks so much.